Hello everyone! With Diablo 2 Resurrected open beta happening in the next couple of days, and with its release next month, I wanted to do a recording to fill in what I feel is the missing pieces. There are certainly a lot of good guides out there to help returning players or help new people get into Diablo 2, but I feel like in some of them, or all of them, and I'm not really sure, fail to mention some of the more important mechanics, I guess you can say. Let me go and get to that. Starting with defense and physical damage reduction. In certain games, defense translates directly to physical damage reduction, but that is not the case with Diablo 2. In Diablo 2, defense just makes it harder to hit you. That's it. There are unique items in the game, like Crown of Ages, which does change that. Again, just like in other games, you would assume damage reduction is a broad term, but that is not the case. Damage reduction applies to physical damage only. Crown of Ages is one of many uniques in the game with damage reduction. Its cap is 50%. However, its cap can be, I guess you can say, over-capped. What I'm referring to is this. Let's say that you do hit the cap of 50%, and then you add another 20% damage reduction to it. I'm not sure that's possible. Let's just do this for an example. If there is a curse or something that causes you to lose 20% damage reduction, then you would still be at the 50% cap, because it's overcapped. That's essentially what I'm saying here, is that you can go over the cap, but it just will stop registering it at 50%. Now, if there's a curse that, brings you down lower than that, then of course you would be lower than the cap, or whatever else it may be. So yes, there is definitely a way to deal with physical damage in the form of damage reduction. So there's that. Let's talk about other forms of defenses, including shields and all the things related to that. Okay, let's see, I need this page. Okay. Shields will have a listed block percent chance, and in some cases they'll have a faster block rate attached to it. When it comes to shields, your dexterity does factor into the block chance. In some other games that's not the case, but in Diablo 2 it is. So you do have to be aware that dexterity is the other factor to your block chance. Faster block rate just makes it more possible to block more consistently. Picture your shield as a skill cooldown. The more you lower that cooldown, the more that it'll proc, essentially. That's how you have to kind of think about it. It's kind of a crude way of thinking about it, but it's the best way I can do it in simplest terms. I haven't really seen any tests or things related to what is faster block rate cap, so I can only assume that there is a cap with it. But even then, it's a pretty rare stat to see, so I wouldn't go out of my way to get it. But, yeah, just something to keep in mind. Now let's talk about evasion. As it stands, the Amazon's really the only one with that. I'm sure there's probably some uniques or other ways to get it, but the Amazon's the quick and easy way to get it. At least as far as I know. So if anybody knows if there's other ways to get evasion, let me know, but for now we'll just assume Amazon. Okay, so Amazon is unique in that it has a separate page for passives, and in that passives is evasion. The great thing about evasion is that it works regardless of if you have a shield or if you're using a two-handed spear, which means that the Amazon is more capable of dealing with defense than the other classes when using a two-handed. Now, of course, there is a drawback to this. The Amazon's dodge or evasion is tied into frames, and, of course, the animation, which means that it's possible for the Amazon's attack to be interrupted not by the enemy, but by its own passive evasion. Yeah, that's where it's going to start getting really annoying and really complicated, because there are certain attacks within the Amazon tree, like Impale, which have a very high chance of being interrupted. So when you combine that with something that's already going to interrupt your attack, it can make things a little bit annoying. You do have to build around that if that's the case. Now, I do want to talk about something related to evasion and dodge. Or, I'm sorry, evasion and block. When you are running or moving, your block chance is reduced by 1/3. That's not the case for the Amazon, because the Amazon has an evasion specific to moving as well as standing still. So in her case, she doesn't have as nearly as much going on in that regard. She's perfectly free to move around and not have to worry about that. But in the case of a blocker, you do have to worry about that. That means if you are playing a build that requires you to run around, such as melee, generally speaking, it's probably not a good idea to try go max block percentage, because it's going to be practically useless if you're moving around all the time. But if you're standing still, in say the case of a Hammerden build, then block chance is perfectly fine to get. But yes, Amazon is much better for mobility and dealing with defense at two-handed. So there's that. Okay, we've covered the physical damage reduction. Let's talk about magic damage. Okay, so this is where things get a little bit even more complicated. When you look at the skills for all the classes, you'll notice there's magic damage, poison, fire, ice, lightning. Did I miss any? No, I don't think I did. Out of that grouping, magic damage is the least resisted, both on the player side and the monster side, because it's its own unique category. There are only a handful of skills in the game that cause magic damage. That's going to be Magic Arrow from Amazon's bow and crossbow tree. That's going to be the Blessed Hammer from Paladin, aka Hammerden build. Psychic Hammer from Assassin, and I'm probably missing a couple of others, but yeah, so they are the least resistant. However, they do run on their own mechanic, from what I remember of the original Diablo and from what I've read. Because they run on their own unique mechanic, they don't apply leech. That means if you have life or mana leech, it's not going to apply to those skills. At least that's what I've read and experienced in the past. So if they change that with Resurrected, then cool, but be aware of that. However, it looks like everything else seems to be roughly the same. Okay, so with magic damage out of the way, let's talk about lightning, fire, and ice more specifically, because just like damage reduction, there are uniques that deal with this. Let's pull this up. Okay. So you'll notice on this particular unique shield, it says fire absorb 10 to 20%, which means that it has a chance to roll anywhere between 10 and 20 when you loot it. But either way, fire absorb, lightning absorb, or ice absorb all function the exact same. So the way this works is going to be a lot different than damage reduction, because damage reduction is on its own, it has no stepping rules or otherwise. But fire absorb, lightning, and ice absorb, they all have a rule set. The way it works is your resistances are applied first. After your resistances are applied first, the percent absorb is applied next. After that, the flat absorb number is applied, if one is in existence. So, once it gets to that stage, the absorb reduces the damage left over from the resist, and that damage, to a certain degree, is converted into health. You might be thinking, oh, well, that's fantastic, because there's a lot of casters on not only the PvP side, but also PvE side. Well, yes and no. It depends on how you're doing your build. But generally speaking, it's lightning absorb that's better than the other ones, because of the fact that fire spells, for the most part, as well as certain ice spells, do a lot of raw damage. Because they do a lot of raw damage, it's really difficult to absorb that, or for that matter, reduce the damage from it. So there's not really much of a point to it. However, lightning damage is entirely reliant on RNG, because normally it's 1 through X number. So in the case of Lightning Amazon, it's going to be 1 to 2,000. Because it has such a broad range of damage to roll, there's a chance it could do so little damage that between the resist and the absorb, the damage doesn't do a thing to you. Or in the case of, say, sparks, let's just say you have a unique elite or boss that happens to proc spark when you poke it. Well, spark by nature does very little damage per spark, so you can negate the damage due to how small it is. That's kind of how I think you have to think about the absorb things. But if you happen to have an absorb as part of the build and just happens to be there because you needed some other stat like fire damage, let's just say, for example, in this case, let's just say you were shooting for fire damage and you just happen to got fire absorb with it, by all means, it's fine to have. But just be aware it's the lightning absorb. That's generally speaking better because of the RNG and because of the damage involved with lightning spells usually. So yes, there is that. Now I want to talk about faster hit recovery. Let me tab back. Here we are. So you'll notice that from the earlier section of the video, the Crown of Ages was used as an example for the damage reduction part. But there is another part of it, which is the faster hit recovery. So the best way I can explain faster hit recovery is that, let's just say that you receive a really big hit and it passes a certain threshold. Then it results in, I guess you can say, a mini stun. So faster hit recovery deals with those mini stuns, if you will. It's a really crude way of explaining it. I know there's probably a better way of explaining it technically, but for the most part, that's just how you have to think about it. So faster hit recovery, I wouldn't say is really a big deal, but it's just one of those things like fire absorb, where if it happens just to be on the item that you want, it's great. So, yeah, it's just one of those things. Now, let me just deviate a little bit to talk about the Druid. The Druid's unique in the fact that when it's in Werebear or Werewolf form, it has a faster hit recovery than the other classes, even with items, is what I've learned from the past as well as reading. I think it has something to do with the frames, and we'll see what happens with the Resurrected. I'll get into that in a second, but if it is a case of frames, then it is a matter of that. On the note of frames, I don't have it pulled up, but before I get into this whole frames discussion, I want to bring up one other thing, and that's weapons do have reach. So the reach of a weapon is dependent on the weapon itself as well as the size of the monster. So if you have, say, a pike, which is naturally a 4 reach, right, and you have a monster that is 4 in size, then that means that you would be able to sort of stay outside of its blocks, if you will, to a certain degree. Essentially, the Amazon's pike, well, I guess anybody can use pike, but Amazon's the one that's going to use it, can be kind of a quasi between a full-blown range character and a Mulier because of its reach. So that's just a real quick summary of that. Now let me talk about the frames. So frames is going to play into reach as well as that faster hit recovery and a couple other things, such as cast and attack speed. So I'm not really sure where things are going to go with Resurrected, because it used to be that in the original Diablo that the game itself, like the core of it, I guess is the best way to explain it, was capped at 25 frames. Yes, I know that's probably going to be an atrociously low number to most people this day, but you're talking about a game that came out in the early 2000s, so 25 frames is actually pretty good, all things considered. But yes, the original was capped at 25 frames. So because it is possible to go over that now, I'm not sure how everything is going to tie in with that. Is it going to follow the same rules as before, or is the higher frames going to result in, you know, PC players having an advantage over console, because console is going to be capped at 60 frames per second? This is the exact same question or debate that's brought up in a lot of games, but where this example seems to be most prevalent is with the Resident Evil series. In the Resident Evil series, speedrunners on PC would use the knife because the knife's damage is tied into the frames. So if you had the right amount of frames, the knife could do more damage than the gun. As a result of that, you were able to just get through zombies stupidly quick in comparison to shooting them. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this, that the whole frame situation is making me question a lot of things, and I'm sure it's probably going to make others question it as well. But, yeah, so there's that. Real quickly, let me also just point this out, because I had this up. Let me see, I think it's this tab, question mark. Yeah, there's that one. Let me see, was it also this one? No, it wasn't. It was, oh, crap. Heal, stamina, knockback. Okay, yeah, okay. So, I meant to mention this in the elemental side of the recording, but I completely got lost in thought. So let me go and real quickly do that. So just like uniques with damage reduction or absorb, there is uniques that do reduce the enemy's resistance to a particular element. So that's why you'll see this one particular item, Griffin's Eye, as a core of the Javazon build. Javazon is one of those meta builds that has been around for a very long time. More or less, it uses Lightning Fury with javelins to do a tremendous amount of lightning damage. So in this case, it does lower the resistance. Now, I do want to bring up yet another mechanic, because this is a really good thing to be aware of. If an enemy says immune to physical, immune to lightning, immune to ice, whatever, you are not going to strip that. They are immune, period, end of story. So while you still may be able to do some damage to them in other means, it's generally speaking not a good idea to use fire against an immune to fire enemy. The best advice that I can give that seems to be missing from the other guides is diversify. In the case of the Amazon, if you're running a javelin or even a pike build, because honestly, the two-handed spears and pikes for Amazon are actually really effective. And I am kind of annoyed that they don't get mentioned more often, because Javazon just overshadows literally every other Amazon build. But anyways, if you're doing something like a pike build, right, you want to go Impale plus Lightning Strike, I think it is. No, Charge Strike or something like that. I forget the class skill name, but anyways, so that way you have some form of alternative damage should you run into something that's like stone-skinned or immune to lightning. Because if you run into one of those two, then you need to be able to switch to deal with that problem. At least a little bit more effectively than you would otherwise. So when you're doing a build, because a lot of these guys will say to research and plan your builds, and I 100% agree with that, keep in mind that you want to keep points around for diversifying. While you will still be able to get plus skills from items, you do want to plan for the build to have some other alternative means to dealing with a problem. Real quickly, I just want to point out one other thing related to this discussion of diversifying. Here it is. So if you do run into something like the Impale skill from Amazon, just be aware that there are uniques and even rune words that can turn a weapon indestructible, therefore negating the negative effects of Impale. But yeah, that's really all I can say. Just kind of keep this in mind. I recommend reading guides or listening to guides. I'll link the two in the description like I said I would. But for now, that's all I have. Thanks for listening.